I was wondering, when we just came here from the church, and during the divine liturgy, as they say in the East, we all repeated several times, "Let us be attentive." In the Latin calendar, liturgical calendar, today is the vigil of the Pentecost. Tomorrow the Holy Spirit will come down. We believe so. So let us be attentive and listen to the Spirit. Let Him speak. We as Catholics here, of course, have to look to the future. We're speaking now about the 21st century, our agenda for the new century. But how far into the future? Just before Easter, last Easter, we had Lenten retreat for our students at our university church in Lublin, and it was led by the current primate of Poland, Archbishop Polak, who is Archbishop of Gniezno, the oldest bishopric in Poland. And at the end, at the last Mass, when there was a prayer of the faithful, one of the students was reading the prayers of the faithful. And in one prayer he said, "Lord, celebrating 100 years of our university celebrates 100 years this year of our history. Celebrated 100 years of our history this year, we pray that the Lord bless us for another 1,000 years." Of course, he was supposed to say another 100 years, but he said another 1,000 years. On one hand, well, should we look into the future and think about another 1,000 years? Not really. But on the other hand, why not? Why not? The Catholic University is part both of the Church and of the world. When we look as Christians, as believers, when we look at the world, we understand, we perceive the world as God's creation. All that exists comes from God, from the Creator. The world was created, as we believe, good. However, a fundamental distortion entered the whole creation when man, the steward of the creation, chose to disobey the Creator. So the good world became marked by evil ever since. The world has ceased to be friendly to man, its steward and inhabitant. And we believe, I'm using theological language, if you don't mind, but I think we need it as well. We believe that fundamental distortion or confusion is not something external to man. On the contrary, it is most intimate. It is very personal to the human being. When we refer to Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution on the Church in the contemporary world by Vatican II, paragraph 10, it says, again about the dichotomy Jim mentioned several times, it says, "The dichotomy affecting the modern world is in fact a symptom of the deeper dichotomy that is in man himself." So the world has become suspicious in a sense, not transparent anymore. The idea of the Creator was that when we look at God's creation, we will see the Creator. But it's not the case anymore. The Catholic University is a human invention, human creation, if you like. It is to serve man, his promotion and maturity, his intellectual, personal and social fulfillment, integral fulfillment. Integral is a good word that I believe the Church is especially fond of. We should remember this when this year we celebrate 50 years since Humane Vitae by Pope Paul VI, who said that at the very bottom, the very fundamental conviction of our understanding the human being, love, sexual life, and so on, is the so-called integral anthropology. So, being from this world, the university is marked by the distortion, being a good invention, but it's marked by the distortion, by evil. And in this sense, it has become ambiguous. It is a community of God's good creatures, men and women, but the ones who are sinful, whose hearts have been distorted. even a successful Catholic university, and a wealthy one, is an imperfect, distorted structure. And that's why we will always need things like our Catholic Universities Partnership to reflect on where we are, and what comes next. We believe, it's what Jesus said in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 13, that the wheat and the weeds will continue to grow together till the harvest, till the last day. Even a very good Catholic university is an imperfect, in a way, sinful place, because sinful people compose it in this sense. Now, in 1990, John Paul II, to whom I will refer once or twice or even more, published the Ex Corda Ecclesia, a special pastoral constitution on Catholic universities. I want to mention John Paul II again and again because when we celebrate this year 100 years of our history, we look to our history, look back, and try to learn again, especially from special people or figures that we were blessed with. One of those figures, or the first, was of course Karol Wojtyła, our professor of moral philosophy, who came to teach at the university in 1954 and continued to teach until he was elected Pope, and that was in October 78, for 24 years. So when he published the Ex Corda Ecclesia, the first few words of the document are Ex Corda Ecclesiae Natus, the Catholic University is born from the heart of the Church. So it's not just a human invention. It's born from the heart of the Church. As such, the Catholic University shares in the identity and mission of the Church itself or herself. And that mission of the Church is to make God present in this world and to share with the world the message of salvation that was offered to humanity. It's a serious mission, then. It is not just about education, about preparing young men and women for a professional career, to be effective and capable engineers, teachers, whatever, doctors. Being a Catholic university, there is much more at stake. Father E.G. Radziszewski, he was professor educated at KU Leuven in Belgium. He was rector of the so-called Spiritual Academy in St. Petersburg before the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. When he saw the revolution coming in 1917, he understood he had to leave. He took a group of his friends, professor of that Spiritual Academy. They crossed the border and came to Poland. It was the very beginning of Poland as an independent state, because Poland did not exist as an independent state for over 120 years, all the 19th century. Only after the First World War, the Poland reappeared, and that was in November 1918. He crossed the border in the spring of 1918, and he met some Polish bishops, and he said to them, we are going to have Poland, an independent state again, with the help, for instance, of the President of America, Wilson, I believe his name was. And he said to them, we will need a Catholic university in Poland. And they said, okay. They were not very much convinced. However, well, we are Catholic bishops, so perhaps we should have a Catholic university. And they said, all right. And that was in July 1918, that officially the bishops said, all right, we will have a Catholic university, and the place will be Lublin, where we are now. And Radziszewski was appointed the first rector of the university. And he had an idea, we should have a motto that will tell what we are for. And the motto that he invented, he thought we should have, is Deo et Patria, to God and to homeland or fatherland, our fatherland. But it's important, significant, that the first word is Deo. We will have our university first to God or for God, and later for our homeland, our fatherland. And I think that matters still now. We do have a lot of problems at the moment, as all of us have, with money as well. However, when we remember about Deo, and when we remember that we should be attentive and let the Spirit speak to us and lead us, we will manage. However, we should also remember that various temptations will come, and we will have to be careful to, we believe we should resist temptations. That's the Catholic teaching, though there's also another teaching that temptations should not be ignored because they may never come back again. That's another teaching, but it's not a Catholic teaching. Anyway, I'm using that word temptation because I myself was quite struck by what I read in the first book by John Paul II. Now popes write books, but before John Paul II, I don't think any popes wrote books. The first book by John Paul the title was Crossing the Threshold of Hope. That was published, at least in Polish, in 1994. And when I was reading it, it was published in Poland by our university press. It did help us financially. They say, I can't remember that was long ago, but however, the rector would say that. In one place when he was asked, John Paul II was asked about the condition of modern society, and he said, I think what is important, we should see that people today seem to be ever more giving in to a temptation of self-sufficiency. People tend to give in to a temptation of self-sufficiency. Man believes today that he or she no longer needs God for his or her life and fulfillment and so on. We have so many technological, scientific tools to make our lives better, good, prosper and so on, that God becomes irrelevant in a way. So a few words about temptation that we may face. That temptation of self-sufficiency, temptation of life totally secular, living, as is often in the document of the Church mentioned, living as if God did not exist. There may be a God, but it really doesn't matter to me. There may be a God, there may be no gods. I live as if God did not exist. When Pope Benedict XVI was elected Pope, he was 78. He was an old man. And a journalist once asked him in the very beginning of his years as Pope, Holy Father, you are a very old man. What do you want to do now as Pope? You are 78. He applied twice to John Paul II to retire. The first time John Paul said, well, could you please, Cardinal, wait another year or two with me? And then the second time that he applied for retirement, John Paul was already very ill. And then he was elected Pope. And when that journalist asked him about, what do you want to do, Holy Father, when you are 78 as Pope? And he replied, he said something like this, I think if it happened that I'm at this age Pope, the most important thing I want to do is to remind the world of the primacy of God. And that's all I want to do, remind the world of the primacy of God. There is a temptation of regarding faith in God as no longer relevant, temptation of religious indifference. There is a temptation, recently we've heard that word, of post-truth. There's no truth. If there is truth, everyone has temptation of post-truth. There's no one truth for all. There is a temptation of a restricted, purely human rationality, that reason alone is enough to reveal the mysteries of the world and our life. John Paul II, his famous encyclical Fides et Ratio, starts with famous phrase, Fides et ratio, faith and reason, are like two wings on which the human spirit flies to the knowledge and contemplation of the truth. We need both ratio and fides, reason and faith. There is a temptation of an anthropological error, as John Paul II would say many times, a false concept of man, reduced concept of the human being, like, for instance, collectivism in communism, materialism in Marxism. Pope Benedict would later speak not only about an anthropological era, but he would speak of an anthropological revolution, referring to things like gender ideology or transhumanism, posthumanism, and other ideas. There's a temptation of belief in total plasticity of human nature. I can make of myself what I like. There's a temptation, when we come back to our university, of limiting the university to vocational training, disregarding formation of the whole person, integral formation. There's a temptation of having a not-so-Catholic university, temptation of even disregarding theology at a Catholic university. Ex Corda Ecclesia number 19, the particular role of theology in the Catholic university is in the search for a synthesis of knowledge, because what we experience is the serious fragmentation of knowledge. There's a role for theology in the dialogue between faith and reason. And there's one more thing that it stresses, Ex Corda Ecclesia, the Constitution, that theology serves all the disciplines, all other disciplines, in their search for meaning, by bringing a perspective and an orientation not contained within their own methodologies. We fundamentally need theology at the Catholic university, and there's a temptation to removing it, at least to the margin, if not at all. There's a temptation of losing hope and joy. In his exhortation, Ecclesia in Europa of 2003, John Paul would speak of a temptation, or we are tempted, he says, by a dimming of hope and fear of the future. We become fearful of the future. In that exhortation, there are a lot of the so-called troubling signs of the times. As the Pope says, clouding the horizon of our societies, of our continents. They are temptations that societies face and to which they are not infrequently give in. Temptation of losing Christian memory and heritage. Temptation of living without spiritual roots. Temptation of separating our Christian faith from our practical daily life, our university life. Temptation of losing the meaning of life and so living with inner emptiness. Temptation of existential fragmentation and then loneliness. Temptation of weakening the very concept of the family. Temptation of a selfishness that closes individuals and groups in upon themselves. Temptation of disregard for ethics and an obsessive concern for personal interests and privileges, which spreads individualism. These are just a few of the temptations we will face, we will experience. We do not need to give in to them. We can resist them, but only if we place our trust in God and His Holy Church. Being born from the heart of the Church, we know where we can find help and assistance and light. Only when we remain with the Church. So my fundamental advice for our Catholic universities for the 21st century, or even for another 1,000 years, is to stay with the Church. Thank you.